All right. Now, thank you all for coming, and thank you up in the balcony for coming. Thank you for tuning in on our streaming event. We've been streaming all day long, and we've been talking about our love of Europe. And this is our chance to go way back for people who have nothing else to do on a Saturday night in Edmonds and share with you a little bit of the history of our company. And I'm going to get rid of this, and I'm gonna just before we get started, I'm just curious who we got here. Is there anybody here that has not been to any of the events during the day? Raise your hand if this is your first event of the day. All right, thank you guys for coming in. How many people here have been on one of our tours before? Can I see a show of hands? Okay, so you want to know the dirty secret of how we got started and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to kind of talk as if you've been on one of our tours, and I'll relate to things, and this is sort of fun. I have no idea exactly what I'm going to talk about, but I've got my oldest slides from the old days, you know, and put them together here, so we'll just have a little fun for about 75 minutes. So I'll try to get out of here by 9 o'clock. I do want to... let's see, how many of our guides are here? Are any of our guides actually in the room? Raise your hand. Oh, they're way up in the cheap seats. Hi, you guys. Heckle away. Okay. Thanks so much for being here. I do want to mention, before I get started, that if you've noticed the beautiful photographs in our promotional material, they're done by a photographer named Dominic Bonicelli. And Dominic is just a brilliant still photographer. I work with the best video team around, I think, for my TV shows, and I have huge respect for still photography as well as videography. And Dominic goes on our tours, and he's running around today getting shots. And Dominic is right here. There we go. And Dominic's gonna take a few shots. Why don't you? I'll just introduce Dominic there, and then you can ignore Dominic while he makes me look like Elvis Presley on stage or something like that. We're gonna head off right now to Europe through the gutter. Okay, so we just changed the name of our company this year to Rick Steves Europe. It's odd to be a brand, but I guess when you have a TV show and so on, people know your name more than other stuff, so people would call our company. We say Europe through the back door, and they think they've got the wrong number, so we thought we better change it to Rick Steves Europe. But for 30 years, it's been Europe through the back door, and in my very earliest days of traveling, it was just slumming around Europe. That's what it was all about. And I never wanted to go to Europe. My parents dragged me there when I was 14 years old. One of the people in this shot is me. And this is, my dad imported pianos from Germany and from Vienna. This happens to be near Vienna, in a little town right on the border of Hungary, back in the Cold War days. And I could see the communist world on the other side of the Neusiedler Sea. And the man in the window worked for Börsendorfer pianos. Those are the finest pianos made in the whole world. They only make 200 pianos a year. One piano, or 2 pianos per man per year, they brag. Every piano is not on an assembly line. It's like it's birthed. You know, it has its own personality. And I would go over there with my dad, who was a piano tuner around Seattle, and my dad would know the musical personality of his customer. He would actually fly to Vienna. They'd line up about 6 or 7 of these most expensive pianos in the world. I would play them, and my dad would analyze the personality of the tone, and he would choose which character of tone fit his customer's style. He would autograph the sounding board. They'd put it in a box and mail it to Seattle. But that's an amazing thing to think, that you don't just get a 6'7" grand, you get a 6'7" grand that has the personality for your musical style. I just love that old European quality, you see. And as a little kid, I was sort of awestruck by seeing great pianos made in what used to be a monastery. And each cell was where a piano was put together. And then on the off days, they would take us sightseeing. And we went to a dusty little town, and it was Sunday, and everybody in the town with their top hats and so on was in the church. And then right after Mass, everybody, Grandpa, Grandma, the kids, everybody would walk across the dusty square, past the fountain, and into the beer garden, or the wine garden. And they would all eat rustic lard on rustic bread. They would spread the lard on the bread and drink their local wine and tell stories. And the man on the far left, I remember he was telling this story, and our friend from the piano factory in the window there was translating, and the man on the far left claimed to have witnessed the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914. And he told the story like he was right there. And up until that time, I had never cared about, history and all that kind of stuff. I was just wonderstruck by that, and it occurred to me, man, this is interesting stuff to go traveling like that. I distinctly remember it was a stupid idea to go over there. My parents dragged me over there, and after a few experiences like that, I thought, this is not a bad way to spend your summers. I vowed after that trip to go back to Europe every summer for the rest of my life, and I went every other year until I got out of school, and then from 18 on, I've been going every year and traveling with. I'm just so thankful I do not get tired of all of this. Now, I used to travel heavy. Right now we enforce this travel light thing, but I'm my own best worst example. And on earlier trips, we would get the biggest backpack we could find and fill it with all sorts of stuff. It's like we're going camping around Europe, and it was just so silly how much we took. But this was me, a happy guy on the day after graduation from high school, just about a mile away from here, heading off to Europe with my buddy Gene. And I remember, if I look back on photographs of my bedroom way back then, there was one book on the bookshelf, Europe on $5 a Day. That was the book. That was all there was almost, remember? Arthur Fromer's book, and there just wasn't a lot of information out there. And my buddy Gene and I took off, and we were two ragamuffins in Europe. We had about $2.50 a day for 80 days in Europe. The entire trip cost us well under $1,000 for the flight and the Eurail pass and everything. Every week or so, we'd put all of our money on the bed and add it up and divided how many days we have left on the trip and have to tighten up or loosen up depending. We would actually go more than, we'd count the hours we could go without spending any money at all. When harvest time came, we could actually have from fresh fruit because we could pick it off of the trees and so on. And it was so fun to be slumming around Europe. And so that was the trip of my life, really, was when I was 18 years old, going down to Boeing Field on a Scandinavian, a Sons of Norway charter flight. Remember back then we did these German and Norwegian charter flights to get over to Europe cheaply. And you can imagine going to Europe for your first time with a Eurail pass and the wonder of all of the fun sightseeing you can do. Thankfully, I have relatives up in Norway, and I was able to starve myself down to living on one sandwich a day and some a little bit of Coca-Cola or something like that. And then I'd go up to the relatives in Norway, and they would just stuff me, and it would ruin my whole ability to survive on a little food, and then I would be expanded again, and I'd need more food as I traveled. But it is nice, especially when you're slumming around Europe, to have relatives to drop into. I vividly remember going into the communist zone, the Warsaw Pact, and hanging out with people. And I even learned at a young age that in a communist system, the people who are most comfortable talking to foreigners are the people who have chosen to live their lives freely with nothing to lose. They've just said, I'm not going to play the game, I'm just going to be bottom rung in this society, and I'm going to do whatever I think. If you wanted to play the game and kiss up to the society and play by the rules, then you could get a good education and a promising future. But I noticed, even as a teenager traveling around Europe, there were kind of two categories of people: the people who played by the rules and those who were independent spirits. Another very exciting thing for me as a kid traveling around Europe was to go into Turkey. And I remember I never learned my foreign languages. I quit my German after about a year in high school, and I remember my teacher at Edmonds High School got me out in the hallway and he said, "Steves, you'll regret this." And I thought, he was right. Now I look back on it, but I had no interest in learning a foreign language when I was in high school before I knew it was fun to go to Europe. But I did learn enough German to have that very handy in Turkey, because way back then, there weren't many people that spoke English, and when you go to Turkey, your connection linguistically was to find somebody who worked in Germany. The original Gastarbeiters, I think, went from Turkey to Germany to work hard in a real difficult economic situation, but make a lot of money on their standards of their hometown in Turkey, and they would send home money for their family to set them up. And I would meet people in the dusty little remote communities in Turkey who would come up to me and say, "Ich spreche Deutsch, ich arbeite in Deutschland für 2 Jahre." You know, I speak a little German. I worked in Germany for 2 years, and that would be my ability to communicate with the Turks that I met. But it reminded me there are so many places off the beaten path where you become what people stare at. You become the oddity. You go to places where you're not part of the economy, but where you're suddenly part of the party. My rule was to go to a godforsaken little podunk town that no tourist ever went to, get on a little minibus and go down a small road, and when I try to get off the bus, when everybody in the bus said, no, 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 you must be mistaken, nobody gets off here. You know, that was my key that this is a good place to go. And we'd go into a little hamlet or village that had never seen a tourist. And you could do that back then in a place like Turkey, and that really was rewarding. I had no weight problem back then because I was just slumming around Europe, and picnicking was the way to go. You could live on peanuts in Europe with just a picnic and sitting in the park. I also developed a lot of just cheap tricks. I realized there's musicians all over Europe that are playing lovely music, and they've got boxes of money for you just to take money if you need it. And the beautiful thing. And I also learned there are cafeterias that put out free food. It's sloppy the way it's displayed, but there was literally a class of travelers that were expert dumpster divers, and I would hang out with these people. You would go on a cruise ship from, if you had a Eurail pass, you would go from Stockholm to Helsinki back and forth for 4 successive nights just because it was free with your rail pass. And you could eat out of the cafeteria waste bin, and you could go for free. And you know, it was just this kind of through-the-gutter travels that really were quite memorable. I gained a good sense of cheap hotels. Way back then, you could get a nice bed for $5, and they'd toss a kitten in for no extra money. It is so funny, isn't it, when we think back on our travels as kids, when we were really just quite rugged. I remember so thankful if there was a trickle of water coming out of a shower. Sometimes I'd have to lean up against the wall to get any water on me, you know, and this kind of thing. And you'd find amazing places that are very cheap, you see. I tried traveling in other places. I went to India. As a matter of fact, I love India. When people say, what's your favorite country? I say India, it really is. But over time, I decided I'm going to be a teacher of travel, and I decided to focus in just on Europe. To me, that's the wading pool for world exploration. But going to India, every moment, every way you walk, every image is just incredible. You can just stay in one little hotel and one day walk in that direction, the next day walk in that direction, the next day walk. You can have 4 days just strolling through the streets, having a wonderland. I remember when I was a kid, I was just fanatic about writing journals. Every year I took an empty book, one of those 200-page perfect bound empty books, and I would fill it up, and I would write really small, and it was just, I look back now, and I figure, oh, this is a travel writer waiting to happen, but I just loved taking notes over there on the spot. This is my friend Jean, and we're going through India together, and doing things that are not just going to the Taj Mahal, but getting a shave in a little village that's never seen an American. Way back then, I had this notion of becoming a temporary local. I wore a T-shirt all the time that said, I'm not a tourist, I live here. And that's this T-shirt here. And this is the door to the castle, or the remains of the castle, in Tintagel in southwestern England, which is the mythical birthplace of King Arthur. And you know, I found this door, and to me it was so evocative. And way back when I was a college kid, I was developing this company, and the idea was going through the back door. Europe through the back door, not the front door. The front door is formal, everybody is dressed up and very careful. But back door, people are casual and more intimate. And that's what I wanted to share in my travels. So for a long time, this door was one of my marketing tricks. As I said, I always had one of those empty books, and I found myself thankful that I had a couple hours to wait at the train station because I had a lot of notes to put into that book. And as a travel writer, for me, it's really clear. You need to do your writing right on the spot. You need to be right there taking notes. And to this day, whenever I travel, I have a little Moleskine book in my back pocket or in my shirt pocket, and I'll be taking rough notes. And I have a discipline when I'm working in Europe on the road. I don't go to bed until all of my rough notes are put into the laptop and organized good enough so that when I get home, I've got some vivid material to use for my books or whatever. Now, when I was in college, First of all, I was going to Europe every year on a budget, and I was a piano teacher, and that's why I had to travel so cheap. I didn't have a lot of money. I loved teaching piano. I taught right here on this same street. I had about 50 students, and I just loved the work, but kids wouldn't practice in the summer. So I thought, I'm not going to struggle with this. I'll see you in September, and I would take off for 3 months and travel. And slowly I was realizing I was learning from my mistakes over there. And I thought other people were making the same mistakes, so if I could just package the lessons I learned from my mistakes into a class, I wasn't even thinking about a guidebook, but ultimately a guidebook, other people could learn from my mistakes rather than their own and have a more smooth trip. And I would have a good excuse to go back to Europe every year and update my material. So that was sort of the beginning, and I had a class at the University of Washington here. We have the experimental college, where people can teach how to fix your bike, how to dance, how to make a log cabin, how to travel, how to cook. So I had this class called European Travel Cheap. I didn't apologize for that. It was just cheap travel. And it was one of the most successful classes at the University of Washington Experimental College. Hundreds of people would take my class. I'll never forget the first day I offered the class. I thought I would have 20 or 30 students taking the class. I had 100 of their parents taking the class. And I thought, I didn't even know what I was going to teach yet. I was just going to BS it, but I've got 100 adults in the class. I thought, I better get my act together. It was a 6-week series, 6 or 8 Wednesday nights, and it cost $8. I remember I had like 100 people signed up. I remember the first time I left my dormitory to teach one of these classes, I got 100 people. They're all going to give me $8 to show them slides and tell them stories about Europe. I left the dorm with, it seems like I left the dorm with 100 $2 bills, and I came back with 100 $10 bills. And you can imagine, as a 19-year-old kid, thinking, whoa, I've really struck on something here. I just paid for my plane ticket just by giving a talk like this. So I was giving this talk all the time. My budget travel class was 8 hours on a Saturday, and then for 6 hours the next day on Sunday I'd give a history and art class, and then if people still were around, for 3 hours on Sunday evening I would teach a class called Travel Beyond Europe, TBE. But this was the handout, and those were in the days of mimeographs and so on, and it just really was a fun way to start the business. Now, on this same street that we're on today, just down the way, across the street from where we are today, my dad had a piano store called Steve's Sound of Music. That's where the pianos were. And I would, work after school fixing the pianos and polishing them and try to help my dad sell them. And then I started teaching piano there, and eventually the business next door came available, and I rented it and created Steve's Studios. There's my fancy sign. Those are styrofoam little bricks from a 5 and dime storm that I just painted enough so that the rain wouldn't bother it. And in there I would give my travel talks, and it was a recital hall. And you can see the screen there that I used to project my slides. When I would give my piano students a recital, I would put this stylistic staff with the 16th notes and so on. But I would take that down as I would give my travel classes in the same little recital hall where I taught my piano students. I had one other teacher teaching with me in the back studio. I was in the front, and several times a year we'd have our little recitals there. Eventually, I decided, man, I've got to make a decision. Am I going to be a piano teacher or a travel teacher? We had a World Travelers Slide Club that met every first Sunday of the month, which would just pack the place. I would give my talks there several times a week on budget travel skills, and these were the first people that were taking my How to Travel classes. I remember thinking, am I a piano teacher or am I a travel teacher? And I had to make a decision sooner or later. In 1980, I self-published the first edition of Europe Through the Back Door, a little 256-page, typewritten, ballpoint pen maps, terrible little book that I went up to Snohomish Press up here half an hour north of us and bought 2,000 copies. And I remember driving home with those books and stacking them in my piano recital hall. I had the parents of my students sitting on my guidebooks to watch their kids play the piano, and I would be thinking about travel as I'm trying to think about the Clementi Sonantinas, and I finally decided I got to let my students go, much as I love teaching piano, and dedicate my work to teaching travel. So we started Europe Through the Back Door, and it's so fun whenever you start a little business to think of the humble beginnings that you have. And but way back in the 1980s when we were doing this, we had the same mission that we have today. That was when computers were just coming on the scene. My first travel books, you can imagine when you write a book in Europe without a laptop, you're handwriting the book. And then when you're all done handwriting it, you've only got one copy of this labor of love that you've worked so hard on. It was very stressful. And I would finally get enough done where I would go to the copy shop and make a second copy, and I would leave it with somebody in Europe just buried in their attic or something, knowing if ever something happened to my original copy, I had that fallback. And then, of course, later on we had our floppy disks, and later on we had a laptop that was as big as our entire carry-on the airplane suitcase, and now they get smaller and smaller and smaller until our beautiful little laptops today that fit in the outside pocket. But I am lucky to be doing my work right now as far as the perfect window, to have all of the technology to do what I've been able to do, and we still have print. I just love print, and for the rest of my career we're going to have print guidebooks as well as the electronic versions to go. Now, in the very, very early days, I didn't have enough money to pay for my trips on my own without escorting a tour on a big Cosmos company bus. I had a friend who was a travel agent in Seattle, and if I got 20 people together, I would get a free plane ticket. And in my classes, I could always talk 20 people into joining me on one of these very cheap big bus tours. So this was the very first tour that I was ever on, Cosmos Tour number 3112. And this was a group of 15 or 20 people from Seattle that would be a subset of 50 people on that big typical Cosmos tour bus. And when we went on, this is the next tour that I took, but it was me and a hardy group of independent travelers taking this very front door style of bus tour. And here we are landing in Belgium, and we all have that number, 3112, and we got to find our bus in the big bus parking lot, and then we go off on this amazing mass-produced tour. And when I was on that tour, I was thinking, there's got to be a better way than packing 50 people onto a 50-seat bus. And I was thinking, I can take small groups away from the bus and have wonderful times on our own very efficiently, very economically. And back then, as I talk about even today when I'm selling our tours, the standard operating procedure for a big tour company, a big bus company, is to not pay their guides, or just pay them a token wage, and the guides have to make their living by selling tours, taking you shopping for kickbacks, and angling for tips. And I'm on the bus thinking this poor guide is not going to get paid unless he doesn't take us to Van Gogh, but he takes us to diamond polishing instead in Amsterdam, in a conflict of interest situation from beginning to end. All of the tour itinerary decisions were based on how can we wring more money out of our customers even after we've got them on the tour bus. On those kind of tours, and it's the standard operating procedure to this day, they don't make the money when you first buy the ticket. They make the money off of you over the course of your vacation when you're over there. Do you follow me? Even on cruises, I've just been talking to some cruise directors, and the cheapest cruise companies have less time in the port and more time on the ship, intentionally, because they need you on board to make enough money to make a profit on their company. I just think it's much more straightforward for a tour company to make their money up front and then be on your side for the rest of the tour. So that's our philosophy. Our guides are well paid from the beginning, no tips are allowed, no kickbacks on your shopping, and all the sightseeing's included. I was developing these ideas as I was hanging out, just being a pain in the rear for the tour guide on my bus. He was counting on income. I had half of the people on the bus, and I would huddle with my gang and say, we don't need to take that option. I'll take you downtown on the trolley, and we'll go to the beer hall ourselves. One day he got me together on the side, and he just said, you are a real problem for my bottom line. It's just, this is not working out very well. I had a great chance to get to know that sort of guerrilla kind of tour guiding by taking my little subsets of the big bus out on adventures, and I realized this is quite rewarding, and the people really appreciated it. And I thought, for the average American, the organized tour is quite boring. And I looked at these people, and these were not people that were lucky enough to go to Europe every year, like a lot of us. These were people that scrimped and saved. This was the culmination of a lifetime of travel dreaming. And here they are, in a royal palace in Vienna, listening to the Strauss waltzes being played. It is a royal palace, but now it's been turned into a cafeteria with like a moving sidewalk for tour groups to come and go unnoticed, as local retired musicians, they're local musicians, they're retired, and they play the Blue Danube nonstop, talking to each other as they perform, while tour groups come and go unnoticed. It's just a very unfortunate example of Viennese culture. And the interesting thing for me is a lot of these people go home and figure, well, that's what travel is. They just didn't realize how good travel can be. There's a lot of just bland companies, very bland tours. In fact, there's a company in Gibraltar, owned apparently by a man named Mr. Bland, and his ego is bigger than his marketing sense. If my name was Rick Bland, you would not have Rick Bland Tours, I can promise you that. This shot here epitomizes my problem with organized travel. These are Americans, and each of these people, I would imagine, has one meal in their life in Africa. They're in Tangier, in Morocco right now. They all side-tripped in from Spain, like we do with our groups, and they are with an organized tour, and they're going through the town in sort of a fantasy, clichetic, parallel world that isn't really reality. And they're all nervous. They've got their bags on their front, so they won't get pickpocketed. They look like a bunch of paranoid kangaroos. They're sort of going through this town like this, hoping not to get ripped off or diarrhea. And when I'm in Tangier, I look at these groups, and all I can think is self-imposed hostage crisis. Now, they do the clichetic things. They got the camel ride, they got the snake charmer, they go to the carpet shop, and then all of these American tourists doing Spain with a one-day side trip into Africa from Gibraltar over to Tangier. They have one meal, and it's all in the same restaurant. Actually, there's 2 restaurants in Tangier where all the tour groups go. And every time I go to Morocco, I dropped in just to see this garish scene where you've got Americans talking to other Americans, enjoying a Boy George belly dancer in a culture where they're only experiencing the cliches and seeing as shoppers, and then they go through this gauntlet of last merchants before getting back on their boat, sailing back to Europe. Thank goodness they didn't get ripped off or diarrhea. And it's just, you can do better. And that's something that inspires all of us at Rick Steves Europe. I know that a lot of people, when they take a tour, all of their rest stops are big tour bus rest stops. And it's just, it's a way of thinking. If you're a big bus driver or a normal big bus tour company guide, you're worried, can I park a big bus here? Do they accept Visa cards? Do they speak English? Do they serve American-style bottomless cups of coffee? Can 30 people go to the bathroom at the same time? And will my bus driver be happy? At this stop, the bus driver likes it because he's got a chip card, and if he brings 10 groups by, he gets 10 punches, and then he gets a carton of cigarettes, or he gets a bottle of booze. And I'm thinking, what a ridiculous way to shape Americans' travel dreams by stopping here instead of there, because with 10 visits, your driver's going to get a carton of cigarettes. It's just loopy to me, and that is commonplace in the big bus organized tourist industry, and I'm so thankful that we don't limit our travels to that sort of thing. In my own experience, it occurred to me anybody smart enough to be taking my classes was smart enough to go to Europe on their own. I didn't just want to be spoon-feeding people who were mindlessly going to Europe, but I wanted to come up with a tour program where people were engaged and doing their own thing. I remember sitting in the concert halls watching the tired examples of local culture, thinking there's got to be a better way. I remember on my own finding myself in little towns, for instance in Greece, where there's not another tourist within 30 miles, in a town with no hotels and no postcards. And I knew the word tomatio. That's Greek for bed and breakfast. And I knew that if I just stayed in somebody's home, and if I just was flexible enough to get to know the people and develop a taste for the retsina, I would have all sorts of new friends playing backgammon, and I would be dancing and drinking and eating with new Greek friends tomorrow at the wedding festival. Anybody can do that. They've just got to be able to put 20 miles between them and the next tourist and have that adventurous spirit. I wanted to capture that in the case of organized travel. I remember when I was a kid traveling, I was discovering all these amazing unpromoted places I called back doors. Everybody was going to, all of the Shakespeare, or the, Stratford, or they'd be going to, Wiesbaden, and they'd be going to all of the culture, the Romeo and Juliet's balcony, or all the obvious tourist trappy kind of places. And at every one of those tourist traps, there's a magic, sort of wonderful, offbeat, unpromoted, real slice of culture just an hour away. And I just thought, if I can collect all of these places, they're called back doors, put them into a guidebook, other people can do more hitting and less missing when it comes to putting their itinerary together. So ever since I've been a college kid, I've spent about 100 days a year traveling through And my basic job is, as a travel book researcher, is to run down all the tips and all the feedback and check all these places out and hit and miss and miss and hit and miss, and then take home the hits and write them up in a guidebook or collection tour so our travelers can hit and every time with their precious vacation. This is just so important that you have a lead person who can do the missing and the organizing and the assessing. I find from my experience that a typical American is good for 5 or 6 Madonnas and children. After that, I don't care if Raphael did it, I've seen it, you know. How many hill towns are you going to climb before you'd rather just stay on the bus and listen to some music? We have a limited ability to be excited about things, and it behooves us to make sure if we're going to expend that attention span, we're going to do it in a place that really is the very best. I'm so tired of hearing people say, I can spend a lifetime in Florence. You know, I know you can spend a lifetime in Florence, but we Americans have the shortest vacations in the rich world. I got 1.5 days in Florence. Cut through the superlatives and explain how we Americans can use our time smartly. As a guidebook writer and a tour organizer, I think it's very important to be able to say, if you got less than a month in England, don't do Oxford and Cambridge, do one or the other, and then make time for something entirely different, right? And Cambridge is better than Oxford. Now we're talking. You could disagree with me, but you'd be wrong, okay? Cambridge is better than Oxford. What a guidebook writer provides and what a tour organizer and a tour guide provides is an assessment. It's cutting through all the superlatives. You know, nothing is that, you know, to die for, as people like to say. Let's turn down the volume on our lavish praise and really help us Americans sort through all those superlatives and find those magical places. So in 1980, I wrote that book, Europe Through the Back Door. The first half was the lecture I gave in all those classes at the University of Washington. It was just simply writing my lecture out. It's so easy to write that. I'd give the talk every Wednesday, and then I just wrote it down. And a lot of people say the book sounds conversational. It was all developed accidentally over giving these lectures for years and years. And then the last half of the book was the collection of my favorite 20 undiscovered back doors. This is a back door. This is the Ehrenberg ruins, just over the border from Mad Ludwig's castle. When you go to Mad Ludwig's castle, the Disney castle, Neuschwanstein, yeah, everybody goes there. You got to get a reservation. It's so crowded. You got to do it. I was just there this summer with one of our groups. I took the tour, and I just love doing the greatest hits of Europe, so I took the Best of Europe tour, and we complemented the visit to Mad Ludwig's Neuschwanstein castle by spending the afternoon hiking up to this very castle that I visited when I was a kid, and we went up there, not a tourist in sight, commanding view of the valley, and we really had this ruined castle all to ourselves. 1978 or 2014, it's just as magical. So these are the back doors that distinguish your trip. I remember when I was a kid, in 1 week, I discovered Civita di Bagnoregio and the Cinque Terre, and just in the space of a couple of days. And I was thinking, wow, I'm developing this whole collection, this whole arsenal of wonderful offbeat places. This is just 2 hours north of Rome. Almost no tourists go there. When I first started traveling there, this was really one of those things that taught me, and then the Cinque Terre, that you can distinguish your itinerary if you know those places that do not have promotional budgets. You know, just because a place has a big promotional budget and is famous doesn't mean you should go there. You know, Wiesbaden has a huge promotional budget, and I don't want to go there. I would never take a group there. There's little funky towns on the Rhine, and even better yet, on the Mosel River, that have no promotional budgets that I find much more welcoming, much more charming, and a much better value. So I had the ruined castles, I had the private stone circles, I had the Cinque Terre, the best part of the Italian Riviera, the quintessential hill town. Everybody goes to Tuscany and Umbria for their hill towns. That little hill town I just showed you, Civita di Bagnoregio, it's about 5 miles out of Umbria in Lazio. It's a state that really doesn't promote tourism. It's right next to Orvieto, but it's not promoted because of the odd modern, you know, county line, and consequently, it's got relatively fewer tourists, and that is a quirky reason why it's less discovered, less promoted, and a great place for us to know about. The Cinque Terre, the 5 towns of the Italian River. Beautiful women, beautiful wine, great place to enjoy Italian culture in the rough. Nearby is a tourist trap called the Leaning Tower of Pisa. We would go there, so we'd see the offbeat places, but of course you got to go to the famous places. This is one of our early groups when we just had 8 people on a bus. Over time, our buses got bigger, and we handled more people on our tours. This was, I think, 8 people, and then we got to 14 or 16 people, and eventually we got to where we are now, 24, 26 people, something like that. It was very tough for us to grow because I was really committed to 8 people in a minibus. And I had a lot of friends that would travel with me every year in the minibus. And when I got a big bus, they said, say it ain't so. You've betrayed us. You're going big time. But you know, with the big bus is so much nicer for a lot of reasons. It's a big, quiet ride high above for a beautiful view. The guide can do the guiding instead of doing the driving. Also with 20 people or 25 people, you've got a more interesting social world instead of 8 people. If 8 people, if there's any tension in the group, you feel it. You feel it. We used to have a thing called a group hug with our little minibuses. If there was tension, we'd pull the bus over. Everybody would go, we have to do like a group hug and get over it, because I wasn't going to live with that tension on the bus. With 25 people, if there's a little bit of problem going on, you can just avoid that person and do just fine, and it doesn't permeate the ambience of the whole group. Our very first groups were really fun. And I would, this might have been our very first tour, I forget, but it was just 8 people and me. Okay, 8 women and me. I don't know why. I mean, it could have been I charged less for women, but no, I noticed on our early tours, if you looked at our early tours, once in a blue moon a guy would join us, but basically it was just me and the girls. And I did the driving, and I had my own headphones, so I would just be in my own world and everybody would be chattering away. And it was really ridiculous for me to do the driving and the guiding. When I think about the people who took our tours, it makes sense that women would take a tour, whereas guys would go on their own, just because everybody has an adventurous spirit, but women have certain realities they got to be aware of as far as personal safety. They want to have the fun adventure, but they don't want to be risky and take chances, so they would find more comfort in a group of 8 people with a guide. Very interesting. My son Andy is 26 years old right now, and we dragged him to Europe every year for the first 20 years of his life. I never thought he was paying attention. He's graduated from Notre Dame, and now he's running his own tour company. And he's sort of competing with his old man. I'm keeping a wary eye on him. He's actually he's got his own market segment. When he went to foreign study in Rome, he realized all the kids get Thursday as their last day of class. American foreign study students always are done noon on Thursday, and they don't have to show up for class until Monday morning. And when I was a kid, nobody flew first one way in Europe or point to point in Europe. It was way too expensive. Now it's all deregulated, and you can fly cheaper than you can take the bus. So these kids know how to do what's called flash packing, and they can get online and do their search, and they can fly round trip anywhere to anywhere for $50. Now, you take that with a student budget and a 3-day weekend, and you're studying in Barcelona, and we're going to Dublin for St. Patrick's Day. We're going to Athens, and we're going to charter a boat. We're going to go up to Berlin and check out what's going on there. So Andy has devised this thing called Weekend Student Adventures. And Weekend Student Adventures are $200 3-day weekends for foreign study Americans. Every weekend, Andy's got his guides in the best 8 cities in Europe that lend themselves to fun for students doing these Weekend Student Adventures. I'm very proud of him, and I just dropped in on one of his tours in Barcelona about a year ago, and I got to be his assistant guide. And he had 20 people on his weekend student adventure in Barcelona, and I think 18 of them were girls. And it was just like his old man. And it occurred to me, it's the same sort of dynamic. The college girls want to have the same fun as the college guys, but it is more safe with a group. And Andy paid attention to his dad and learned well, and he's filling that niche. All right. I remember when I was driving these minibus tours around Europe, looking in the rearview mirror and seeing everybody just sacked out after burning the candle at both ends and all the fun that we had. We had a lot of fun with our groups. We were very experiential right from the start. I remember when I was driving the bus, we'd go through the beautiful oak forests in England and South Wales, where they actually made a lot of had the timbers, I guess, for the Navy, and it was just such a dramatic forest. And to enjoy the feeling of it, we would let some of our group sit up on the rooftop, and we'd glide under the oak trees. Anything we could do to have a more vivid experience, we would do. We couldn't get away with that these days, but back then, it was sort of a rough and tumble kind of travel. we would do laundry and hang it up in the back of the bus, and we'd stay in youth hostels, and we'd stay in the circus tent in Munich. If you go to Munich to this day, there is that circus tent. It cost about $3 for the night. You get a mattress, you get all the blankets you want, you get free tea in the morning, you get 400 roommates. It's kind of a cross between Woodstock and a slumber party. I remember one night with my group that we would, time after time on our Best of Europe route, we would come into Munich, and we would park the bus and have a great day, all day doing all the sights. We'd go to the beer hall at night. We would drink too much beer, and then I would, with the minibus, I would follow the tram line. I think it was tram 17 to the end, because I just knew from my independent travel that tram 17 to the end took you to the circus tent, and I'd come there with 9 people, and they'd always find a corner for us, and we would circle our gear and all spread out our mattresses, and we would go to sleep there. I remember waking up, or being woken up in the middle of the night, and one of my tour members was sitting cross-legged on top of her mattress, just kind of sobbing. And she looked at me and she said, "Rick, I'm not doing so very well." And you know, because you could hear the sound of Australians rutting in the corner, and it was just a very crude kind of circumstance for a traveler. And I don't know if it was legal, but back then the only thing we had in our first aid kit was Valium, so I helped her out, and she was okay. Later on another tour, I remember I had this deep-seated need to inflict horrible accommodations on Americans just so they could be more thankful when they got home. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking, but I just was tired of Americans complaining about petty things when billions of people are homeless. And I thought, if you can't handle a lousy hotel one night in your life, you got to get real. You know, you're lucky to have a roof over your head. Well, that's not a good attitude for anybody that wants to build up a tour company. But back then, I had that mission to let Americans appreciate how good they had it when they got home. And when I think back on it, it really was sort of an interesting evolution. I remember, by the way, before I get along with this, I remember I was talking about those back doors. I went to, it was Gidley. That's a stone circle like Stonehenge in the south of England, and in the Dartmoor. I think it's in Devon or Cornwall, down in the southwest tip of England. And I hiked out there, and I was there all alone, and I was surrounded by the wonder of wild ponies and the wind and the turf and this private stone circle that was as old as the pyramids. And I just thought, nobody knows about this. I was staying in the youth hostel, and I hiked there. I had just been at Stonehenge with the blowhorns and the porta potties and the barbed wire and all the tour buses. And I just thought, boy, there's 2 different ways to experience the magic and the mystery of Druids and prehistoric England and so on. And I had found it here at this own private stone circle. And I remember, it was very interesting when I think back on it. I was on the boat going to France the next day, and I thought, I want to be a travel writer. I was writing up that, you know, and I didn't even know what to do with all this stuff, but I was catching all of these wonderful discoveries. It's so fun as a tour guide to be able to lace those together in our tours to this very day. That's what we're all passionate about at Rick Steves Europe. I was just, so fun because I was just on the Best of Europe tour this summer. Every year I take one of our tours, I just page through our catalog and I choose what strikes me as interesting. And I was tempted to do any of these fringe kind of destinations. And I remember last year I thought, no, I want the greatest hits. So I took the Best of Europe in 20 days. It's all the famous stuff. Amsterdam, the Rhine, Mad Ludwig's Castle, Venice, Florence, Rome, the Cinque Terre, the Swiss Alps, and Paris, you know. And I used to do it 5 times a year, round and around. I've done it so many times. And I went back again just this last summer, had the time of my life, visiting all the same places again. Not working, letting my guide do the work, and I was just enjoying it as a tour member. But this is a shot of us having a picnic in the shadow of Neuschwanstein. And we used to pull the bus over and set out our picnic, and it really impressed me how a tour operator could really make a lot of money by doing the cooking. You know, it was just quite amazing. If you rent a car and you put 8 people on it, it's quite economic for everybody. Some people ask me, how do we make any money on our tours? They look at all the bits and pieces and add it up, and it's not that much more expensive when the dust settles of renting a car yourself and going around. And what I tell people is, if I can talk 25 people into sharing one vehicle, right there, compared to 25 people renting cars or using train passes, Right there, there's more than enough savings for me to be happy as a businessman. And if everything else is just a wash, the cost of eating, sleeping, entertainment, guiding, and sightseeing, the transportation efficiencies by having everybody share a bus, that's where is the economy of scale that a tour operator can actually offer a good value, pay the guides well, and still be profitable. So that's the trick. It was tough with 8 people on a bus. It works better with 25 people on a bus. The problem with us as a business is we have a 50-seat bus that comes with the expense of a bus driver and so on. And a standard tour company will pack 50 people into a 50-seat bus. You can imagine that's really using the bus, isn't it? But if you have just 25 people on the bus, we have to go at a very high fill rate. If we'd only have 20 people on a bus that's designed for 25 or 26, that's going to really dent our profit. But if we're 98% full like we are, we can manage with half as many people on our buses as the standard tours and offer the intimacy of a small group and still be viable. Also, I learned from the picnics and everything that if you do a little organizing, there's a beautiful economy of scale. I absolutely love the idea of splurging for the luxury of the best guide in the city for 4 hours and dividing the cost by 25 people. It is such a beautiful thing. It costs peanuts per person to do that, where it would be way out of reach for an individual. And that's the kind of stuff that challenges me and I get all excited about as a entrepreneurial tour company. This is just a fun memory of the old days when we had 8 people on a bus and we did a lot of picnics. We did a lot of what we call rolling meals to save time. I would ask the group, do you want to have an extra hour at the next site? We'll have lunch on the road. And we would just buy the ingredients and we would, different people would take turns doing the cooking and we would be driving and eating at the same time. This is on the top of the Schilthorn, high above Walter's Hotel in Gimmelwald in Switzerland. We'd go up there, and this is a guy named Christoph that we met once. And again, this is an example of my interest in having experiences. I had 8 people on a bus, and this guy was hitchhiking. And I stopped and I said, if you'll teach us how to yodel, I'll pick you up and drive you where you want to go. So we let him on our bus, and he spent some time teaching us all how to yodel. And by the end of the ride, all of us were yodeling. It was just really a fun little moment, and it was just a matter of figuring that out. Yo-tuli, yodel-loti-yo, yodel-loti-yo, yodel-loti-yo-ti-yo, la-la-la, yodel-loti-yo-ti-yo, la-la-la, yodel-loti-yo-ti-yo, la-la-la, yodel-loti-yo, yodel-loti-yo, yodel-loti-yo-ti-yo, la-la-la, yodel-loti-yo-ti-yo, la-la-la-la-la. Modulate, yo-tuli, yodel-loti-yo, and then it is faster and faster and higher and higher. But that was just... You will wait a long time to hear me yodel again in public, I can promise that. So, but I just love this memory of stopping the bus, getting to know a local, and having him teach us how to yodel. We would stop our bus, this is in the Peloponnesian Peninsula, just in the middle of nowhere, and ask a farmer for directions, even if we knew where we were going, just to hear his voice and see the sparkle in his eyes. That's the kind of adventurous spirit you can have on your own, and that's the kind of adventurous spirit we had in our groups. This is, again, one of our early groups. You can see the wonderful ratio there, boys to girls. Same thing. Pretty good same thing. And it's just so much fun to think back on the rough and tumble fun that we had over the course. I got famous for bringing a lot of girls into these little towns in Italy. And it was just like every 3 weeks, Rick Steves is coming in with a bunch of American girls. It's like, here come the brides, you know? And it got to be where I'd come into a little village. This is Bagnoregio, outside of Civita Bagnoregio, and the local soccer team would be waiting at the hotel for the bus. And we just, well, that guy there is really distracted, isn't he? So you got that very interesting dynamic of American women going to Italy and really being put off by how handsy the local guys are. But sometimes if they're not interested, people are also kind of disappointed. So it's a very interesting sort of balance. And we found that in Italy, Well, Italy is just back, at least back then, it was just crawling with horny bachelors that had that just were waiting for the tourists. And the Italian men seem to chase women like dogs chase cars. It's just what they do. And a lot of times we would send one of our tourists out into the square and just kind of time how long it would take before some Italian guy would be on them. So. But it really got ridiculous, and it's something that we had to put a stop to. And as we got more professional, we had to be a little more protective of our women. And this is Angelino, and we used to take our groups to Angelino's hotel. Past tense, we had to stop it. Angelino just couldn't figure it out. You cannot assume every American woman that comes into your hotel is like some floozy you saw on TV in some kind of a movie, you know. And we had to change our hotels and adjust that. Our tours got more and more popular, more and more people. It got to the point where it's just too many people in a minibus. I loved the whole idea of a minibus. But obviously, in 21 days, 8 people on a minibus, you can work for 80 days and only take 30 people. There's no way to grow. So I had to get real about 2 things. There can be a Rick Steves tour without Rick Steves driving and guiding, and we can have a big bus full of people instead of 8 people on a minibus. Much as there is a sort of an ideal romance of a tight little company like that, I am so thankful now that this year we took 20,000 people on our tours instead of 30 people, and we've been able to maintain the magic of travel. 20,000 people. That first group I showed you, literally each one of those people on that first bus had to meet me out here on 4th Avenue and kind of audition for the part. I wanted to know who they are and if they really were going to be fun to work with and live with in Europe. We were doing our tours, in a lot of cases, for a couple of years we did our tours with no reservations. I didn't want reservations. I wanted to kind of have that flexibility. We would come into town at 5 o'clock, and I would park the bus in the main square, and I'd tell the group, okay, everybody scatter, look for rooms, we'll meet back here in 30 minutes, and we'll choose the best rooms. And everybody would go out, and we'd come back and move into that hotel. I remember in the old days, we'd stay in youth hostels, and every night we'd pull out the maps after dinner and debate where we want to go the next day. And for many years, we used to do charity tours called an untour, where we'd have that same philosophy. We would do, with 20 people on the bus or 24 people on the bus, we'd still go with no reservations. It was really a kind of exciting for me to have that challenge of going around Europe with 20 people and the responsibility of a tour guide with no reservations and see if we could manage. I always had the fallback. It was a charity tour, so I wasn't making any money, so you can't complain. We were donating all the money to some cause, and it really was fun, although I noticed as a tour guide, my Americans could never relax and enjoy what I was telling them after about 1 o'clock if they didn't know where they're going to be sleeping tonight. They were just so uptight because of the specter of being homeless for one night, and here I got into that sort of mode again. So I realized if they're going to relax, we got to have reservations, and of course now we've got our reservations figured out quite well. We went from the minibus. By the way, this is not Europe, this is Afghanistan, and that's just your standard public transportation in Afghanistan, at least when I went there a long time ago. And we got the big bus, and I remember the first tours with the big bus. What a treat. We had great drivers who would take us down little roads that no other buses had ever been on, and it was an adventure for them because they were doing this guerrilla kind of travel in the context of a big bus tour. This is one of my favorite scenes in all of Europe because this is our bus all alone in the tour bus parking lot in Rothenburg. And to this day, when I go to Rothenburg, I'm all stressed out as I approach Rothenburg, even this summer, wondering if our bus is going to find a place to park in the tour bus parking lot just at the edge of the city because there's so many tour buses there. And if all the bus spots are gone, you have to park way far away and everybody's got to walk a long way to Rothenburg, and that's really a drag for a guide to have everybody having to walk too much. So we would be lucky to find a place to park our bus when we arrive in the middle of the day. Invariably, at night, after dinner, if I need to go back out to the bus in Rothenburg, there would be the most beautiful sight for me in all of Europe. Our bus all alone in the tour bus parking lot, reminding me that right now there's only one group in town. And this is something that we have to calibrate a little bit. We want to spend the night in the very crowded places that are a tourist trap in the middle of the day. We get up early, stay out late, and enjoy the city without any of the tourism. Makes a huge difference. And with our program, we go to Mont Saint Michel, we go to Bruges, we go to Rothenburg, we go to Obidos and Orvieto and San Gimignano, but we enjoy it without the tour crowds because we know when to be there. We made over the years some great friends in our hotels. This is Walter, and Walter runs our favorite hotel in Gimmelwald. He just turned 90 years old, and he's still handling travelers coming in. We don't take our groups there because he's not strong enough now to handle 25 people at the same time. This is Senior Soriso in Vernazza, who ran a little hotel called Pension Soriso. For 10 or 15 years, I called him Senior Soriso, and he never corrected me. And then finally somebody told me, you know, Rick, his name is not Soriso, that's the name of his hotel. He's Mr. Favetta. Soriso means smile. And I was calling him Mr. Smile for 10 or 15 years, and he never corrected it. But that's Senior Soriso. Back then, we had so much fun with the enjoying the local wine because wine was amazingly cheap. Wine was about $2 a bottle. And I remember at Senior Soriso's hotel in Vernazza, after an evening of dinner, we'd have like 20 empty bottles on the table, all locally bottled, no labels, just dead soldiers there, and the bill would be $20 or $30. A cheap trick for any tour guide is just to buy a little wine for the group, and all of a sudden things start to mellow out. We were doing the same tour for many years, just Europe, the best of Europe in 22 days, and then we decided to branch out, and this I remember was our first trip to another area that I hadn't done. I had done England and the best of Europe, and then this was our Spain tour. And this was with some of our early guides, and we had Dave Herline, who's still with us today. He was our first tour guide, and Mike McGregor, and I think Steve Smith came along maybe a couple of tours after that. But this was our tour in Spain, and I remember what a thrill it was to actually get into another country, and this is sort of the beginning of getting more and more itineraries. Our bus drivers have always been good friends of ours. Europe through the back door has grown from a little core staff like this quite a few years ago to 100 people now. And we go to the travel shows, and we've always had our little travel center where people can come in and plan their trips. This is one of my dreams, right, as when I was even a kid, was to have a place where people could use my notes and sit down and do some photocopying and do their plans and their maps and share all of my resources and put their trips together. Even as a kid, I had this library for travelers, and today we still have that resource center where we have all of our TV shows, where you got a photocopy machine. You can make a few copies without buying the book. You can sit down and plan your trip. And of course, we've got consultants, and we've got all the information that you might need to plan your trip. Back in about 1990, I had a big break. Some local people decided I could make a TV show, and they worked very hard and quite heroically to get our TV series started. We had a pilot, it worked well, then we had a series, and that worked well, and all of a sudden there's a show about Rick Steves Europe airing all over the United States. In those days, we had our Best of Europe itinerary. That's the best 22 days that Europe has to offer. We had a book called, this was a manual for our tours. When I was giving my talks in classes like this, I would be teaching people how to travel on their own, but I'd always have our handbooks for our tours laying around. I always prided myself in the fact that I had very honest customers in my classes. They would give me a check. I would never check the ID. Everybody was very honest who was taking my classes, and I loved it. I had my tour manuals laying around, hoping that during the break people would thumb through the tour manual, like what they see, and maybe take the tour. Time and time again, they would thumb through the tour manual, like what they see, and steal the book. It occurred to me, this little tour handbook is driving decent people to theft. I need to make a version of our tour handbook available for people who don't want to take our tour, but who just want to do it on their own. Common sense, really, if you're a travel teacher. So we produced the tour manual in a way where you could do it without us. That was the beginning of my guidebook series. Here we have a book called 2 to 22 Days in Europe. It's like everything I knew about doing that itinerary if somebody wanted to pay me the big bucks and have me take them around, but for $7.95, they could buy the book and all the brains of that itinerary and do it on their own. This has been our philosophy from the start. I gave up charging for my classes and I started teaching them for free just because it made more sense. To this day, I offer my TV show for free to public television. I offer my radio show free to public radio. It airs on 270 stations every week for an hour. And of course, that lets people know me more and like what I'm doing and buy my books and take my tours. Right now, our guidebooks, which started in this honest attempt to let people not give me their business as a tour organizer, right now, our guidebooks for each country in Europe are the best-selling guides for each of these regions. And we're just so excited about that, and we've really raised the bar high. So our philosophy is you can take these books and you can do our tours without us if you would like to. Originally, they were 2 to 22 days using the same, you know, Arthur Fromer was Europe on $5 a day, right? That was the focus, taking care of your money, $5 a day. How can you do it cheap? Now I know that Americans have this shortest vacation, and a very valuable and limited resource is our time as well as our money. I didn't plan this, but it just was sort of good entrepreneurial skills, I think, was to recognize that and make a book called not Europe on $5 a day, but Europe in 22 days. Do you see what I'm talking about? And the philosophy here was being very aggressive at helping people use their time smartly. So on this itinerary, you'd say exactly how to structure your day so people would travel smartly. That's the essence of our tour program as well. Eventually, my publisher said, you know, it'll do better if we take the straitjacket of that time frame out of it. But that same spirit of using your time as well as your money smartly is in all of our books. And it's just so much fun to be able to build this travel guidebook line. Now we've got 30 different guidebooks, and we've got a staff of 10 people right here that are doing all the editing, and I'm just really excited about that end of our business. If you want to go on your own, you can take the guidebook. If you want to take a tour, you can take our tour. If you're afraid of traveling and you just want to stay home, you can watch the TV show. It's perfect. It's perfect. We ended up going up to Norway and doing tours of Scandinavia. And any of our tours, it really was this passion for using your time smartly. I remember running a very tight ship. Everybody at the first day of the tour would get a money belt, and in the money belt would be a list of all the hotels. And I told them, if you're late, we may very well leave you. You're adults. You've got the hotel address in your money belt. You can catch the train and meet us at the hotel. And many times I've had to make that point a little more seriously by actually leaving somebody. And it puts the fear of God into people, and they're right on time for the rest of the tour when you actually do leave somebody. I always tell people, if there's 25 people on the bus and you're 4 minutes late, you just stole 100 minutes of group time. And that's not okay. I don't want people to be sitting nervously on the bus 5 minutes before. We know exactly what time it is, and 2 or 3 minutes before the bus is going to leave, everybody piles onto the bus. Right on time, we have a buddy check, and we're on the way. We can just turn on a dime. We can really accomplish a heck of a lot more than normal tour companies because we have that passion for punctuality. In the old days, we used to stay in youth hostels. That was part of my passion for letting Americans get out of their comfort zone when it comes to accommodations. And we still want to get people out of their comfort zone, but when it comes to accommodations, people need a refuge. So we got away from that. This is one of those early back doors. You saw me there alone on an earlier shot. Well, as a tour operator, it's fun to have people there in the context of our tours. This is the Ehrenberg ruins, and this must be from early 1980s or something like that. And just a couple of months ago, they were there on the same mountaintop in the same ruined castle with the same sort of jubilation as we had discovered and conquered our own ruined castle. We love to be able to stop and meet the friendly locals and see what's going on in the farm country. We love to have friends who are farmers in the village that know when our group's coming in and they'll stop what they're doing and play the accordion for us. We love to drop into little vintners' homes and go into their cellar and have him literally tap the keg and let us try his new wine. We love to get our travelers out of their comfort zone when it comes to the cuisine. If it's steak tartare in Paris, give it a little tiny try. I remember in the old days commandeering almost one of these vaporettos, the boats like buses that go through the Grand Canal in Venice. We would take over the front part of the boat, 20 of us, and I would sit in the front and explain all the palaces that were going by as we cruised through the city. Now we've got the same spirit of that, but we've got it in our audio tours that come on our app. We have an app which is free. Tens of thousands of people use it, and it's got 45 of our guided tours that our guides and I give all around Europe. And in that same spirit of doing our tours without us, those who are so inclined can download the app or have their children download the app, and then they can have me in their ear as they cruise the Grand Canal or they enjoy the Sistine Chapel or whatever. I love this app where I can just spread our beautiful tours that I've developed over the years with our guides. Again, it's absolutely free, and I know that if you've got me in your ear for a wonderful day in London, going to all the walk-in tours, you've saved a couple $100 probably in guided tour fees. You will remember us when it comes to go to Paris, and you might want to take one of our tours. Our bus drivers are a big part of our culture. We just had 4 bus drivers joining us today from Belgium, and we celebrated them at every one of our parties. This is Jan. Jan is infamous because he married one of our tourists. And for years we would promise you might even find your own Belgian bus driver and go to Europe as this one tourist did. She sold everything here, moved to Belgium, and really lived happily ever after with Jan. We have our bus drivers powwowing with our guides, and we love our partnership with our drivers, and we've been doing that ever since we started. Great to have a big bus with lots of empty seats. It's sort of our rolling home. One of our traditions is to have a lot of juice breaks and drink breaks. We'll stop for the view, pour a little juice, and take a few pictures, and then get back on the bus. This is one of our tours in the Alps, about 20 people. We like to be able to rest on the bus, that's for sure. And then you got your energy up and you hit the ground running. One of the thrills for me as a tour guide is to sit our groups down in the rubble of ancient Rome and be able to explain the rise and fall of Rome right there. This is a turn on for any guide, and this is something we just love to do. We love to make history and art more meaningful, easier to understand. For instance, a real thrill for a tour guide is before going into a Gothic cathedral to actually build a Gothic cathedral with tourists, okay? It only takes 13 tourists to build a Gothic cathedral. You need first of all, you need 6 pillars. So I won't ask for volunteers, I'll let you use your imagination. You've got 3 pillars here and 3 pillars there. That's the nave, right? And then you've got architectural ribs. This is an arm and an elbow, but think of it as a rib architecturally. There's no bend in the middle. Comes together 4 here and 4 up here, right? Now, when you've got your columns and your ribs, the cool thing about Gothic is pointed arches instead of round arches. If you have a round arch, when you ask the spire to hoist himself up, his weight is going to push down, and you need to have real strong pillars. But if you have a pointed arch, you don't need to have such strong pillars because the weight is not going to go down, it's going to go out, right? Because of the point. So when the spire pushes himself up, the columns with their ribs are going to go outward. So you need to support your columns, and that means buttresses. So you ask for volunteers, and 6 buttresses come running up. And they'll stand behind each column, flush, or you can take it one step further from a Gothic point of view and have flying buttresses. The same support, but stepping back and arching in with more ribs here, right? So you've got your 6 columns, you got your flying buttresses supporting the columns, you got your pointed arches, and now you find somebody who wants to be the spire, and they hoist themselves up, and you've got yourself a solid Gothic structure. Now, if you're ever having, that's a fun way to illustrate that. And now when you step into that Gothic cathedral, it really makes sense, doesn't it? That's a kind of a silly little way to illustrate the wonder of Gothic, but that was the triumph of the Middle Ages, taking you from dark Romanesque cathedrals to brilliantly lit Gothic cathedrals, because now the walls didn't need to be so thick with tiny walls. The walls could be just a skeleton of support, and the walls become opened up to be windows, you see. And now you have those beautiful Gothic stained glass windows, and when you read the Bible right from the first page, it's clear, light is divine. It's important to have a brilliantly lit interior, and that's just one of the wonders of the High Middle Ages. Step into that Gothic cathedral, that Gothic church, and you can see the walls are really a skeleton of support. We also like to illustrate medieval, military techniques. The battering ram is something that was very important, and you can do that with any tourist who's a problem on your bus. This is Gene Openshaw. Gene Openshaw was the guy you saw with me in the old hippie days of traveling, my buddy who went to Europe with me the day after we graduated from high school, and And then he went to India with me the day after we graduated, or right after we graduated from college. Gene has been with us ever since. Gene's really the brilliant art scholar on our staff, and he's the co-author of my Art 101 book, and an inspiration for a lot of us. And Gene, our fun of teaching art comes to a great extent from Gene Openshaw. Gene co-authored Europe 101, which is still in print, and Mona Winks. Mona Winks was Europe's 20 self-guided tours to Europe's 20 most exhausting and frightening cultural obligations. You can probably think of them right now. These places you dread, but you gotta see, right? So we know that a museum can ruin a good vacation, and we know that you need to have somebody who really knows how to cut through all of the extra stuff to give you the best 2 hours when you're still fresh and able to absorb. That's the spirit of the self-guided tours of Mona Winks. That was old-fashioned. I didn't like making people buy a book of all of Europe just if they're going to London. So we ended up getting rid of Mona Winks and taking those self-guided tours and putting them into the various city books. When we finally started making city books, they would include more than the basic stuff in the country book, including self-guided tours. My goal in the city books was to let people buy one book that covered everything they needed so they wouldn't have to buy books at the Vatican and at the Versailles and at the Rijksmuseum and so on. Because one of those books would cost more than my book, and it would be too much information, translated from a scholar 30 years ago, so dry if you read it out loud, your lips would chap, okay? So we have those Mona Winks tours, and now those Mona Winks tours also live in my audio app. So Mona Winks, a lot of people loved that book a long time ago. Those tours still live, and they're available in the app. And again, that app is free, and you can go online and just download Rick Steves' Audio Europe. We're so interested in efficiency in our tours, and in the old days, remember there used to be a time when there was Deutschmarks and French francs and escudos in Portugal and lira in Italy, thousands and thousands of lira. We didn't want our groups to be stacked up at the border, getting lousy rates, wasting time just to get money to make a phone call or buy an ice cream cone. So we gave everybody a cash pack at the beginning of the tour, roughly $10 each from each country you're going to go to, so we could hit the ground running. And I remember ordering up all these cash packs here, and that was a fun part of our tour program way back when. We also used to do everybody's laundry on the tour. Once halfway through the tour, we'd do people's laundry. That was fun because we got to play with everybody's laundry, you know? And no, that was fun because after people picked up their laundry, there'd always be a few little pieces left over, and we could hold it up on the bus the next morning. Whose is this? The luge, the summer rodelboat, is a big part of our fun on our tours. We like to have experiences. Everybody is a kid at heart. And when you go to Bavaria or Austria, you can go to the ski lifts. And in the summer, they get more mileage out of their ski lifts by turning them into these luge courses, right? You ride the lift up, you sit on this little machine, you push the handle, and you go like mad, racing down the mountain. Now, I always remind my travelers, you got to hang on to that stick. And when you want to go, you push it forward. When you want to stop, you pull it back. If you wave to your partner as she takes your picture coming by, you lose your center of balance and you tip like this, and you then suddenly slow down because you just left a good part of your elbow on the track, okay? Very painful. Now, I was once on a plane coming home. I was on an airplane ride coming home, and I met a woman on the plane. She says, "Rick Steves, we got your book. We had a great time, but I want to tell you, we didn't follow your advice about holding onto that stick, and my husband got a terrible wound." And she ran back to her seat, and she actually showed me the scab that was in her journal. I thought, that's just way too much. But I really want to remind people when they do take that luge ride to hang on to that stick. I love getting people high up in the Alps. Up in the Alps, you've got the traditional culture alive and well. We like to stay in little humble cottages, way in the high country where the traditional culture survives vividly. We love to stay in small lakes in the north of Italy. We love to, I'm going to pick up the tempo a little bit here because I'm talking a little long. We love the efficiency of feeding our groups a picnic. And for a long time, our passion was to help people enjoy and savor the traditional cuisine through the picnic ingredients. Go into the markets, do some shopping, put it together, introduce everything to everybody, and then enjoy eating it like this. I really miss those days on our tours. Now it's gotten to the point where it's a little more efficient for us to go to restaurants and so on, but that's sort of our heritage. We love to just eat and enjoy the great cuisine of Europe, and we've got a lot of good friends all over Europe that love to cook for our groups. Originally, we kept our groups in youth hostels. Not all the time, but we had a lot of hostels and a lot of mountain huts. We don't do that anymore. but we do like to stay in characteristic hotels where you have to climb the elevator up, or climb the stairs up to the top instead of riding the elevator. It's interesting to me, some people would say, no, I don't want to stay in a 400-year-old hotel in downtown Venice because I got to climb this many stairs. I'm looking from the breakfast room down at the street level on our hotel right on the Grand Canal near the Rialto Bridge. These people who complain about not having an elevator will then move all the way across town or even onto the mainland to have a modern hotel with an elevator so they don't have to climb the stairs, and they don't understand how many darn steps they have to take just to get to their elevator. We are right downtown. Without an elevator, it's a blessing. You can take half an hour to get down to the bottom if you want to, and you're still better off than commuting out of town for an elevator. It's hard to find an elevator in some of the towns that we go to. We love to stay in little mom and pop hotels all over Europe. So my main task when I'm in Europe is updating the guidebooks, and I spend a lot of time, probably 60 days a year, running around, checking things out for the guidebooks, doing all the goofy sites. I have to do the stupid sites just to know to say it's stupid. Don't waste your time and money. And there's a lot of these business ventures in Europe that masquerade as cultural and historic experiences, like these goofy little Disney rides all over England these days. I like to make mistakes and take careful notes. When I make a mistake, it's part of my work. Recently, I rented a bicycle from a guy in Amsterdam, and he said, I want you to promise me you're only going to lash the frame to the bike rack, not the wheel to the bike rack. Yeah. So for 4 days, I lashed the frame with my lock to the bike rack, and my bike was fine. On the last day, I got sloppy, and I locked my wheel to the bike rack. The next morning, I came down, and all that was left was the wheel. The guy knew what he was talking about. I had the sort of difficult, emotional sort of challenge of walking back to the bike shop with the wheel. And I told him, I'm sorry, I didn't lock the frame to the bike rack. And he said, I'm not going to charge you for this, but for the rest of your career, I want you to tell people to lock the frame to the bike rack. So I've been doing that ever since. Lock the frame to the bike rack. When we travel, we only let our travelers take this much luggage. A carry-on the airplane size bag, 9 by 22 by 14 inches, plus a little day bag. You leave the big bag downstairs or in the hotel and you function with your day bag. Now 9 by 22 by 14 inches. This year, 20,000 people took our tour. Nobody was allowed to take any more than this to start with. I don't care what you finish the tour with. You're stuck on the curb at the end of the tour with all this stuff you bought. That's just up to you. But you're going to start the tour mobile. For a lot of people, that's a radical concept. What? 9 by 22 by 14 inches? That was my cosmetics kit. Nope, that's everything. And I drop into these travelers a week into the tour thinking maybe I was a little tough on them. I bullied them into packing light. I'll tell you, in 30 years, I've never had anybody upset with me for making them pack light. In Europe, there's two kinds of travelers, those who pack light and those who wish they pack light. Think about it. You'll never meet anybody who, after 5 trips, brags, every year, I pack heavier. With experience, you get serious about packing light. So this has been so much fun for me in my work to go over there and, just dive into the culture, to enjoy the cuisine, to be able to type it up in my funky little hotel rooms. This is me at my happiest, really, after a busy day of researching the France book or the Paris book, to pull up a little table, turn on the laptop, and transfer my notes from my little Moleskine and all the scribbles in the book into the laptop, and then email that file back to my office here, where they tidy it up and send it to the publisher. This is my son Andy on one of his first trips to Europe. He's the guy that's running the Weekend Student Adventures now, and he lives in Europe. He spends 6 or 7 months a year in Europe running his tour program, and if you're interested in that, check out, just Google Andy Steves and you can find out what he's up to. But Andy and I would enjoy the luge rides on those early trips. This is Andy now, or this is Andy a few years ago, and he's very comfortable in Europe. Our program has expanded where we've got all of Europe covered. Our books have grown from little books to bigger books and bigger books with the help of our local friends in Europe. I just love the sort of connection. To me, it's all about people to people. If I'm making a tour making a TV show or writing a guidebook, and I'm not connecting my American travelers with my European friends, I'm a little disappointed in myself. That's what carbonates your travel experience, is meeting real people. Not seeing cultural cliches on stage, hanging out with a bunch of Americans and going back to your high-rise American-style hotel, but immersing yourselves in those cultures. One of the fun things about our guidebooks, I think, is we connect people with mom and pop shops, whether they're hotels or restaurants. This is a guy named Nico. I visit him every couple of years when I'm doing my guidebook work. We have a tradition of holding up that year's book with last year's visit, holding up that book, and we do it each time I drop by, and we still hold up the photo of the photo of the photo, and it just keeps on going, back and back and back, if you had a magnifying glass, and it just reminds me of the fun of working with these Europeans for now more than one generation. As I mentioned earlier, museums can ruin a good vacation. With our material, we know that you're good for a couple hours in these great museums, and we've got the material, whether it's the app or the guidebook Europe 101 or our tour guides that know how to make the art come alive and be fun. By the way, I did a 4-hour lecture in 3 parts right on this stage earlier this year, intending to have that post-produced so it could be on my website so you could learn what I think is the most important 4 hours to understand history and art and enjoy it in your travels. It's entirely free. I must say it's a very tight lecture. I worked on it really hard. It's hard to distill Europe from the year 500 up until the year 2000 into 4 hours. Obviously, it's kind of ridiculous to even try, but it's a very helpful 4 hours. If you'd like to check that out, just tune into our website. You got a whole slew of classes that you can enjoy there on the website, along with all 100 of our TV shows. But my art series is something I never give in public, really, and I think it's really helpful. If you like the art of Europe 101, check out that lecture. For me as a teacher, it's so gratifying to see school groups in Europe using our Art 101 book, and the kids are actually enjoying learning about all that great history. If I look back on 30 years of teaching, it's really, I didn't have a grand plan, but it's evolved in a way that kind of makes sense to me. You remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs? You'd start off covering your basic stuff, getting shoes and some food and a roof over your head and heat, and then doing things that are creative and self-actualizing, and actually then getting altruistic. There's sort of this pyramid. And if I look back on 30 years of teaching, I've had the same kind of progression for travelers, I think. In the first decade, the 1980s, for me, it was all about cheap tricks. Europe through the back door, European travel cheap, how to travel on a budget. Okay, that's the foundation of all of this. Then in the 90s, it was all about appreciating the history and the art, the cuisine, the culture, the wine, and so on. And my book was Europe 101, and I really enjoyed teaching that sort of dimension of European travel. And since 9/11, I find myself sort of rising up to what I consider the pinnacle of Maslow's hierarchy of travel needs, getting out of our comfort zone, traveling in places where we develop an appreciation of people and ways of life that are different than ours, where we hang out with people who find different truths to be self-evident and God-given, and then we come home with a broader perspective. And that, to me, is the very best souvenir. And then when we implement that here as citizens of this great nation, we're making travel a political act. Now, when I go around the country, that's usually the talk that I give, travel as a political act. Those 3 books, Europe Through the Back Door, Europe 101, and Travel as a Political Act, are kind of our whole teaching program. And then we've got all the different country and city guidebooks for the details. You know all about our tour program. It's fun to be able to share with people all the itineraries we have. If you're thinking about the best 3 weeks that Europe has to offer, it's clear to me this is the route. This is what I was doing with 8 girls back in the late 1970s. And this is what we're doing to this day. This is the flagship of our 30 itineraries, and if you look at that, to me, that's the best 3 weeks that Europe has to offer. I like to start in Amsterdam. Rather than the big city, we stay in Haarlem, which is the cute little town. It would be like, you know, home basing in a small town, half an hour from the big city. Then you go into Germany, you settle in a village on the Rhine River. These numbers are how many nights we would stay. A stop in Rothenburg an der Tauber for the ultimate medieval town in Germany. Down to Reutte, just over the border from Mad Ludwig's castle at the ruined castle that we visited. Then over the Alps down to Venice, Florence, Rome, the Cinque Terre, the Italian Riviera, the best of the Swiss Alps, one day in the countryside of France, and then finishing with the finale in Paris. Now, obviously, that's just a blitz tour. It's almost ridiculous, but for the best first 3 weeks in Europe, that is really an amazing experience. And when you take a tour, you'll accomplish double per day what you would on your own because everything is figured out and waiting for you in a row. It is so darn efficient. I did this exact tour last summer following one of our being on one of our groups, and I just marveled at how much fun and how smooth and stress-free it was. Of course, that's just the gateway tour, and then you can focus and have a little more depth and sanity in the itinerary anywhere in Europe if you look into our program. We've got guidebooks that cover every corner of Europe, phrase books, shows, maps, and we've got our website, which is a resource for people. We've got 10 years of radio archives on here. We've got a very busy corner, which is our Travelers Forum, where I don't have anything to do with it. Everybody else is just sharing information there and answering people's questions and having fun that way. Again, all of our TV shows on there, and there must be 10 lectures just like this from this stage covering every country in Europe. If you want my 90-minute take on Scandinavia, if you want my 4-hour take on European history and art, if you want my basic 90-minute how to travel on a budget talk, if you'd like my 90-minute travel as a political act talk, all of those are available at ricksteves.com. If you'd like to enjoy our radio show, it airs all over the country, but you can also use it as a podcast, or you can just dig into our archives. It's been so much fun to make our radio show. In fact, for me this whole week, I've been very busy interviewing all of our guides as they come into town, getting a half a year's worth of material almost. We need to produce 40 or 50 hours a year, and we do it right here in our shop. I just love being the curious traveler, asking the questions, talking to somebody who's a soccer hooligan, talking to somebody who is evangelic about a Belgian beer, talking to somebody who hunts truffles in Piedmont. I got to talk to the Queen of Norway, or the Princess of Norway. She was traveling around the United States. She came here, and I got to ask her about royals in the 21st century. Do you still marry your cousins, and are you all just a little bit off, you know? And then we distill these interviews into nice, tight radio bits, and they appear on our show. So you've got that whole archive to listen to if you would like. I mentioned our app. And our app is done now in real time. So when you get on that boat on the Grand Canal, you can just sit there and, if you don't mind me in your ear for an hour, I will narrate the whole Grand Canal to you, from the train station, Piazza Roma, all the way to the Doge's palace. And the cool thing is you just sit there, just like I used to bark out the palaces as they floated by to my groups. Now we've got a whole new age. You got your mobile, your smartphone, you got me in your ear, and you're listening to the whole thing narrated to you as you go. I hope you can take advantage of those and our different guidebooks. I'm just wrapping things up here. I want to remind you about our TV show again. This is my passion. I'm so thankful for public television. With public television, I can write scripts where I can assume an attention span, respect people's intelligence, and produce shows that are not driven by a passion for keeping advertisers happy, but by a passion for helping us better understand our world. And if you'd like to call in right now and support your station, the phone number is right here. Only with public television would I be able to take an American film crew to Iran and not demonize that country, you know? I mean, they've got some very big problems with their government, but there's 70 million people in Iran, and it'd be nice to get to know them. Just last year, we went to the Holy Land, and we did a show on Palestine and Israel. We produced a 1-hour special called The Holy Land, Israelis and Palestinians Today. One of the big challenges for me as a travel writer and a travel teacher, very gratifying to deal with some hard issues, exposing Americans to some very important things, and I've got, thankfully, a network that has the courage to do that, even though it will anger people on both extremes, Palestinian and Israeli. We have to come to a middle ground, respecting each other's baggage and heritage, and that's something we can do with public television. So we're having a lot of fun with that. We've got a lot of new shows out just now on public television. I just love the sort of guerrilla, impromptu way we produce our shows. We can commandeer a car and show a bike ride, even if the bumper sticker says, "Kill your TV." So our groups are a lot of fun. Our guides know how to make the history and art come alive. Our guides that are in charge of the whole tour, like Rick Garman here, know when to step back and let our local guides take the front. This is Hansa Vihan, who would be our local guide along with a bunch of other friends in Prague. And with Hansa, you can actually hear the story of how the Czech people won their freedom. Imagine, you can read it in a book, but you can actually hear somebody who was right there 25 years ago, when for 10 nights in a row, 100,000 people in Prague would come out and shake their keychains at the communist government's headquarters saying, it's time for you guys to go home now. Get your keys and get out of here. 10 nights in a row, 100,000 strong, the Czech people, facing off the armor of the Soviet Union, stood there, jangling their keychains at the communist government, and then on the next night they all gathered and the government was gone and they had won their freedom. Now, can you imagine standing right there, looking at that balcony with somebody who jangled his keychains? I got goosebumps right now telling that story, and it's just an indirect sort of thing. You can be right there, and that's the fun of history, and that's our challenge as tour guides, is to get you connected. It gets you connected. You become temporary locals. I was just on our Turkey tour. We all went into the village at the market, and we decided to buy the baggy pants that we saw on sale. And then we walked through the town all together with our baggy pants, and all the kids were looking at us and laughing. And then they told me, these pants are only for women. You know, we're tourists, we can make mistakes. We are honestly curious about those cultures, and that's the bottom line. They're glad our men dress up as women in their baggy pants in this little village that has never seen an American tourist. That is a modern way, I guess, that we go through the back door. So, as I mentioned, every year I get to join our groups. I love the kind of people that take our tours. You know, that's one thing with our marketing that we're very good at, I think, is scaring away the high-maintenance travelers. A lot of people look at our DVD and they say, it's almost like you're trying to scare away the people who are going to be a big problem. Exactly. We got to live with you over there, and we need to get the right people on the bus. This is Steve Smith. Steve is our Francophile, co-authors our France book. He coordinates all of our 100 different guides, and Steve has been just one of our 100 people in our office that help connect us with these beautiful European families. This is our family here at Europe Through the Back Door. Our passion is to help you experience Europe, whether you're going to go on your own, using that guidebook, being your own tour guide, or whether you're going to take one of our groups. We like to have those experiences. I'll do whatever I can. I'll hang on the edge of a cliff high in the Swiss Alps just to know you probably shouldn't do this, you know. This is called a via ferrata. It was one of the most frightening things I've ever done. We were clipped on here, but we went, this is the easiest spot, but for the rest of it, I was standing on a cliff, if you've been to the Lauterbrunnen Valley, and they've got these little rebar things that stick out, and then the iron cable to hang on to. And I was looking down between me and the cliff, I don't know, 1,000 feet, at little tiny cows way down there, and I'm just hanging on like this, going along the cliff for about a mile. I mean, it was just, and by the time I was done, for 5 nights after that, I woke up in the middle of the night clutching my mattress, you know. But the Swiss people, they do this without even worrying about it because they trust cables. That's my theory. Swiss people trust cables. I don't trust cables. But you can have all of these exciting experiences around Europe. If you know what little spiral staircase to climb up after Mass, you can hear the greatest organist in Europe playing one of the most wonderful pipe organs there in Paris. You can find these living treasures like Malcolm Miller giving lectures at these wonders in Europe like Chartres Cathedral, and you can be an extrovert. This is really fundamental. You need to be an extrovert. If you're not meeting a lot of people, it's not their fault, it's your fault. If you see 4 cute guys sitting on a bench, ask them to scoot over. I've been saying this for 30 years, and it works beautiful. They're just hanging out, enjoying the parade of life go by, and if you join them, if you have the nerve to say, buongiorno, scusi, and sit down with them, they'll still be talking about it, and you'll have a fun memory at the same time. Europe is ready to share its culture. They'll carve us a wooden shoe. The museums are just better organized than ever, and I'll tell you, when we go there, we can enjoy the fine culture. We can enjoy the traditional culture. We can get off the beaten path, just like I was when I was a kid. Today, finding those offbeat nooks and those backdoor crannies. All right, hey, I want to thank you so much for coming here and wish you happy travels. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank you.